Sin más, vamos a pasar a la próxima parte de este bloque, que es una charla por Mark Ferguson de neXtgen Agri Ltd de Nueva Zelanda. El título de la charla es Producción de lana a lo largo de la vida en Australia, nivel actual de conocimientos y caminos de transferencia de tecnologías para mejorar la eficiencia, la producción y la rentabilidad.
G'day, Mark Ferguson, CEO here at neXtgen Agri. Thanks very much for the opportunity to speak today. Fantastic to be contributing to this conference and hope you're having a great conference. I've been asked to talk about lifetime wool production in Australia, or the current knowledge and technology transfer pathways to improve farming production, efficiency and profitability is my topic. I've summarised that down to something that's a bit easier to say, which is a better wool industry. So that's what my career has been about trying to improve the sheep industry, sheep and beef industries. But I guess for a long time that's been pretty much focused on the wool industry. We do a bit more than that now at neXtgen Agri, but that's what we're going to talk about today, considering it's a wool conference. So yeah, I guess we get up every morning trying to make the wool industry a better place. Just want to acknowledge a couple of colleagues before I go on. Associate Professor Andrew Thompson, or Tomo as we know him, and Darren Gordon, who works with us at neXtgen Agri. Both of those guys I've worked with since about 1999, 2000, and on and off for a big chunk of time over my career. And yeah, I guess a lot of the things we talk about in terms of sheep management are definitely we've developed in combination with these guys and led by Tomo most of that time. I guess if we think about how we improve lamb production in merino sheep, it's pretty much around management of condition score, and there's been a lot of work over the time to improve reproductive performance in merino ewes. What we found way back in lifetime ewe management days, or lifetime wool days, was that the higher the condition score of the ewe going to the ram, the more lambs we're going to scan, to the higher the reproductive rate. You see there we've got maternal ewes there, a composite maternal, and merinos down off that line a bit. Some of our more modern merinos are definitely higher up, but they're generally parallel. So the higher the condition score of an animal, then the more lambs we can expect. Just to clarify what we're talking about with condition score, most of you should know that, but we're palpating that loin area, feeling for fat and muscle over the short ribs, and giving that a score between 1 and 5, with 3 kind of being the economic optimum. So yeah, more condition, more lambs, and that's been I guess a long-term knowledge in the industry, and something that we all strive towards. The other thing we definitely focus on managing is lamb birth weight. Lamb birth weight's a big driver of lamb survival. Something like 75 to 90% of the variation in lamb survival, depending on the year, is driven by lamb birth weight. And there's this optimum lamb birth weight, and we know that we can manage that through nutrition and through genetics of the animal. And so what we're trying to do is land our lambs in that sort of nice 4.5 to 5.5 kilo range. Any bigger than that in our singles, we start getting dystocia problems. Any smaller than that, we start getting survival problems. The problem isn't in singles; they tend to be born about the right range, but we do have to be careful that we don't make them too big by overfeeding single-bearing ewes. The problem is in twins that average about 3.9 kilos, which you can, if you look at that graph, that's on the steep end of the steep part of the slope. So every 0.1 kilos you're less than that, you're going to get a fairly big impact on survival, and that's what we've focused on. And so, really, the key thing to manage in sheep production is that twin bearing ewe, and make sure that she's in good condition. So fundamentally, that means we have to know which one's which. So we have to have pregnancy scanned, and therefore separated them out, and know which one's a single bearing, which one's a twin bearing, and feed those twin bearing appropriately. what we know is that, that condition score of that ewe at lambing will drive her lamb birth weight, and so the job is to really manage that condition score at lambing. So there's about 3 or 4 times throughout the year where condition score is really important, and this is one of them. At that point of lambing, we can have our best, or by managing the pregnancy and delivering a ewe in good condition at the point of lambing, means that we can get good lamb birth weights and therefore good lamb survival. And so if we combine those two graphs, which is this one, it shows you what's important, and that is that twin lambs or twin bearing ewes are the most important. And what we're trying to do is get them in the best condition score we can. You can see there the singles are pretty flat, so whether they lamb in condition score 2.5 or 3.5, there's not a massive variation in lamb survival. But in twins, every bit of condition we get on those ewes, the better that survival goes. So what we're trying to do, what we're trying to manage for, is to manage singles to be in condition score 2.8 and twins to be in condition score 3.3 on average at lambing. And if you put them in the same paddock and don't manage them separately and don't manage their nutrition, you'll get the exact opposite of that. Your twins will be in 2.8 and your singles will be in 3.3. And so we're trying to break what biology wants to do by our management. And there's 2 things you have to do to be able to manage that condition score profile. One is to know who's twin and who's single, obviously, so pregnancy scanning. And then 2, you have to be condition scoring ewes, have to have a hand on ewes. It might only be 50 ewes to manage the mob for most of the year. So a random 50 sample out of a big mob of ewes will tell you what the mob's doing. But then at some points of the year, which tends to be at weaning, tends to be at scanning, then putting your hand on every ewe and finding the skinny ones and finding the fat ones is important, because there'll be a group of ewes in there that are twin bearing and skinny, and they are your best opportunity to make money, because if you can get a bit of condition on them, that's where your profitability comes from. In addition to keeping some of those lambs alive, then ewe mortality is also improved. So as we get ewes in better condition, they just survive better. We don't tend to see there's many metabolic problems or any disease problems as much in those better fed ewes. So there's a bit of a win-win by managing the condition score of the ewes. We actually end up with ewes in better condition and therefore lower rates of ewe mortality. And ewe mortality is a bit of a sleeper in the industry. It can creep up and has a big impact on profitability when ewes are worth a bit of money. And obviously our social license to operate means we have to keep ewe mortality to an absolute minimum and lamb mortality to a minimum. So I think managing condition score has been a massive part of the last couple of decades in Australia and New Zealand, and we've seen massive gains by doing that, by helping people do their energy budgets, do their feed budgets, work out what's going on, and then adjust accordingly has massively changed the mortality of lambs and the mortality of ewes across Australia and New Zealand. And so in addition to that management, we've also done that through genetics as well, by putting some extra genetics of condition score, which I'll cover in a minute. One other thing that we've found over the last couple of decades is the impact of mob size, and I think this has probably got some scope in South America and Uruguay, where mobs can be quite large at lambing. What we know is that every lamb or every lambing ewe you take out of a mob, it improves the chance of survival of all the lambs in that mob. So even splitting a paddock in half, where you might have the same number of ewes, just splitting out in half so they can't actually interact with each other has an impact on survival. So this is all around that confusion at the lamb at the birth site. And they look like small numbers, 2% higher lamb survival in twin bearers for every 100 ewes you take out. But that all adds up, and we're all about optimising here, aren't we? We're all about maximising our lamb survival. So these are things worth considering. So getting your mob sizes down, particularly your twin bearing ewes, getting them into smaller mobs has got a lot of potential. So we're rattling through the sort of production cycle really, and this is a bit of a quick cook's tour, and we'll talk about, how we talk more about what we do to help change mindset in farmers as much as what the actual practice change is. when we get around to lactation, so we've got lambs alive now and we're away, there's only a couple of things that really drive lactation, or the amount of milk that a ewe will produce. One is the amount of feed that's on offer. So how much pasture is there will drive lactation, basically. The more feed that's available, more pasture that's available, the more they will milk. Obviously that gets out to a maximum where the quality of pasture drops off, and therefore we don't see any improvement beyond that. And we actually see a bit of a reduction as digestibility drops, and therefore the nutrition available to that ewe drops, and therefore her milk production drops. But yeah, one thing around lactation is definitely getting as much feed as you can in front of the ewe, and that's pretty obvious. We know that from past experience. The other thing is legumes. In Australia, it's predominantly sub-clover, or depending where you are, but a lot of subterranean clover. In New Zealand, there's a fair bit of red and white clover. But whatever your legume is, fair bit of lucerne too in both those countries, or alfalfa. But whatever your legume is, for every 1% extra legume in your pasture, that's an extra 1 gram a day of growth. So if you have a 30% clover pasture, that's an extra 30 grams per day of lamb growth, which over a, say, 90-day lactation is almost 3 kilos difference in that lamb weaning weight. So there is a big gap there. There was an opportunity there, and I know that optimizing pasture and optimizing animal numbers is not always easy, but yeah, the legumes are certainly something that we need in our small ruminant production systems to get maximize our profitability and productivity. So we get through lactation, and then pretty much, and then weaning is often thought of as sort of the end of the game, where you can sort of put your feet up and pat yourself on the back and you've done a great job, and you've done what you've done. But in reality, it's the start of next production season, because what you do at weaning will impact on how your ewes go for that next production season. And pretty much at weaning, there's 3 types of ewes. There's your really fat ewes, and they tend to be ones that lost their lambs, and so you might have a policy that they get calved straight away, or they might go to a terminal or something, or into a B mob, depends on what you do with them. But they're going to be fat, and so they don't need any feed because they're already fat. There's another group of ewes there that have raised a single lamb, and they're in okay condition, and then there's a group of ewes there that have raised twin lambs, and they tend to be a bit skinny. And so if we pull those ewes out and separate them out, we can actually have a great impact on how they are sort of ready to go by that next season. If we put them all in the same mob and chuck them out on the hill, then the reality is that the skinny ones will stay skinny and the fat ones will stay fat. They'll close the gap a bit, but not enough to warrant to set them up for that next year, because we know that those ewes that raised twins last year are the ones that are most likely to do it next year if we get them conditioned back on. So we need to look after those skinny ewes. We need to put them out in their own mob, maybe put them out in front of the other ewes so they can graze blocks or paddocks before the other ones, so they get the best out of it. They take their legume out, and then the rest of the mob come through. There's ways to do it. There's ways to plan it within your farm. But we definitely encourage you to do so that you can kind of get as many ewes into that good condition score for going to the ram. Remembering you're aiming the whole lot to be sort of close to condition score 3 when you get there, and that's and you can only do that if you start condition scoring ewes and adjust feeding requirements. So sort of cover that, draft those ewes on a condition score 3, and they get the best pasture after the lambs. And we know that if you get those ewes back in condition, there's more likely that they'll deliver twins to you next year. If you don't get them back, then they're probably going to be back to single or dry. So I guess in terms of practice change, we've done a lot of work around small groups, and helped farmers to implement a lot of these things, and it's been done across a range of ways, but predominantly there was, I guess the biggest shift was when we had farmers working in 5 or 6 groups of 5 or 6 in a sort of local area, and would go and visit each other and see how they were doing it. And one of the key practices we were teaching them was how do you condition scoring, how do you energy budget, what are you looking at, what do we expect those ewes to do for the month based on what we're putting in front of them, and therefore should we adjust their feeding or just which ewes go in which blocks or how that works. So at that pre-joining, where between weaning and that pre-joining, we're bringing that whole mob in, and we're weighing 50 of them, and we're weighing and all condition scoring, probably condition scoring them, and that's telling us how they're going. If they're ticking away all right, they're going sort of creeping up or going in the direction we want, then that's good. If they're losing weight, then we need to adjust our sights and adjust what we're doing. So by grabbing 50 ewes off and handling them separately, you can, and condition scoring them, you can get a good indication of what's going on. If you do see that they've dropped weight, then it's a time where you might want to go, right, we're going to bring the whole lot through, and we're going to condition score everyone, and we're going to take those lights off again, because even though you got the lights off earlier at weaning, there'll be another group that have sort of now become light in that category, so definitely worth grabbing them and putting them separately. And there'll be some fat ones in the light ewes that you can bring up to the other mob, but you definitely need to be doing that. I guess the key thing that we've encouraged farmers to understand is the energy requirements of ewes, and we can do this in terms of humans, because your adult ewe has about the same energy requirement as a human. There's about 8,000 megajoules a day required. 8 megajoules a day, 8,000 kilojoules a day required for a human. If you see on the back of any packet, tells you what the recommended energy intake of a human is, and I can't remember what it is, but it's about 8,000. So 8 megajoules, and that's the same as what a dry sheep is. But once that sheep is pregnant with either singles or twins and then kicks into lactation, there's this massive increase in their energy requirements, and we need to know what our ewes are requiring, and then we can make some plans about whether we're feeding enough, whether there's enough feed in front of them, whether there's something else we should be doing. And you don't always have the opportunity to do something differently, but you need to know what you expect to happen. You need to know that my twins are running, I'm giving them 15 megajoules a day. I know they need 20, so I'm expecting them to lose a lot of weight. And so that's what we encourage a lot of people to do, is to be proactive, to think about, to plan what's going to happen, to understand what's going to happen, to measure things so that we can actually implement some practices that change the outcome. What we've seen over time is as people start to measure stuff, they can't help but change their management. So even if they say that, well, I can't do anything differently than because this is the only paddocks I've got, as soon as you've measured something and you go, oh, geez, they're going to be short of feed, then all of a sudden you go, well, maybe I could shuffle something onto here or do something differently. And that's when people do their best farming, is when they know that they've got some hungry sheep. So yeah, understanding your energy is a really important part of your future going forward. So in terms of how we go about implementing practice change, and what I should say before I get onto this is we obviously work a lot in genetics, and so I've talked a lot about management and how we improve, or the practices that we aim to improve and introduce in farming, which is basically energy budgeting, condition scoring of ewes, getting mob sizes down, and then managing our singles and twins the best we can. That's the kind of processes we go through around management, and it's just rinse and repeat that. It's a lot of condition scoring, a lot of energy budgeting, and then just adjusting as required. In terms of genetics, we also build an animal that has inbuilt condition score. So breeding animals for positive fat and muscle so that they maintain good condition. We work directly with farmers to understand what they want to improve on their farms, and then we use estimated breeding values and our eyes to find the rams that do it best and to keep the ewes that we think will do it best. So that's, as NextGen Agri, we do a lot of that as well to improve the production. But I was sort of asked today to focus a bit more on the management and nutrition. So in terms of our business and previous things that I've done, how we currently go about getting practice change across the industry, any good extension person will tell you that the first thing you do is increase awareness. And so we started up the Head Shepherd podcast, and you can see there we get very few downloads in South America. We get a heap of downloads in Australia and New Zealand, and quite a few in Europe and North America, but definitely lacking in South America. And my Spanish is not too great, so I can understand why that is the case. But the podcast has been great to just get general concepts out there and increase the awareness of these better principles of management and genetics. We also run a lot of industry days, so I speak at a lot of days in Australia and New Zealand, where we're in a shearing shed or on farm and presenting to a group of people, such as this one at Kerrenpole in New South Wales, and they're great for increasing awareness, talking about some of the concepts I'm covering today. Obviously not that easy to get people to change practice on those days, because you can't have that one-on-one conversation often you're just presenting to a lot of people, but it is a good way to increase awareness, and definitely part of the strategy is always to have this kind of thing going on so that we can sort of tell the message to the masses, and it works nicely in with things like the podcasts or webinars that we do. Throughout my career, I've developed a lot of one-day workshops. They're often kind of thought of as awareness activities, but what we know from experience is that you can actually get a lot of people to do things differently based on a one-day workshop. If you design it well, you can actually have people work on their own businesses within that one-day workshop and go home and do something differently. We developed this workshop called Farm Fit Use, which covers genetics and nutrition and goes through the sort of basics. It's about a 6-hour course, and it goes through a whole heap of information and activities to try and encourage people to do their job better. And so it sort of covers a range of things, but things like the key metrics that people need to be measuring. Hope is not a course of action, so trying to get people into a mindset of not just saying, well, it was a tough year, so the sheep were light and they therefore didn't wean very well. Actually saying, well, it was a tough year, so we split some off, we fed them differently, we actually did a few things differently, and we still wean them pretty well. And that's the difference, and that's the kind of thing we want to move towards. So we cover bred fit, which is genetics, and fed fit, which is management and nutrition. We also cover off functional rams, so we often see rams get a little bit neglected maybe in the industry, so we talk about the kind of things you need to do to make sure the ram team you've got at home is good to go. So within that course, it's a combination of book stuff, so standing in front of the PowerPoint, but also hands-on, so getting farmers to put their hands on condition score and get the opportunity to train them in that. We also have a RAM exercise. Obviously, farmers are very tactile people, and helping them learn in an environment they're comfortable. So we're in that shearing shed, we're in the sheep yards. It's an environment that they know well and they're comfortable learning in, and they're comfortable talking to their peers in. So that we focus on that as part of that one-day workshop. I covered this a little bit earlier, but lifetime year management was about learning in groups, and regardless of where we've gone now in my career, learning in groups is a really key focus. We see it now being used in T90, where with a common facilitator, so you've got someone facilitating. Could be an industry person, could be a scientist or whatever that facilitates the group. But then there's 5 or 6 farmers get together and work in that group together, so they'll all be implementing a practice. So they might be all condition scoring used for the first time and managing that condition score profile. And so the group will rotate around each of those farms to see how each are doing it, so they can kind of learn together and learn from other people's mistakes and stuff. So it is absolutely fundamental to practice change, this group model, so you can get a consultant in front of 5 or 6 people rather than one-on-one is fairly efficient. That process is basically around learning while doing, so it's directly practicing what you preach, practicing what you're hearing about, and having that support of both the consultant or industry professional with you as well as your peers, so 4 or 5 other farmers to bounce things off, which is cool. Just before I go into that, we also have a model where you've got one of the farmers is implementing something, and then there's a group of farmers around that are watching. So a farmer might be preg scanning for the first time in their lives, and the rest of the group are there just to see how it rolls and see what the pros and cons are, and therefore they can decide whether they're going to do it when they get home as well. And then for us, we go through to direct consulting, so everything from right back at that sort of podcast stage right through to direct consulting, and this is really where the rubber hits the road for us. We get a lot of traction. We get a lot of joy out of this, helping people implement these solutions directly in their businesses. We can be much more targeted. We can do a much better job when we're direct consulting. So we've got a team of 11 of us running around doing different parts of consulting, and across Australia, New Zealand, and all over the place. And it is, it's the best model. The best way to improve outcomes is to directly work with farmers, but it's obviously higher cost for the farmers. So some of them elect to just do it in those group processes rather than direct consulting. One thing I would encourage you is to jump on the Lifetime You Management app if you're pretty handy with your English. I don't think there's a Spanish version, but hopefully there could be. This was developed by AWI and used the Lifetime You Management coefficients, and is really good way of doing some of that energy budget, trying to do some of the concepts I'm talking about. This app helps with that, and worth just checking that out. There'll be other types of apps like that you could use. Definitely worth checking that one out. And it's got a whole heap of processes that you can really leverage and use. Another thing we've been working on recently is decision support tools. This one is a combination of machine learning and artificial intelligence and bioeconomic modelling. So we've used a model to train a machine learning algorithm to fill in the gaps a lot more quickly and a lot more gaps a lot more efficiently. So these things are used to help people make those big decisions. Should I be mating this weight or that weight? It's got all the biology in there to help you to determine whether there's money in making the change that you're talking about. In addition to the things I've talked about, I've sort of covered most of these off, but within the NextGen Agri network, we've got that Head Shepherd podcast. We've also got the Hub, which is an online meeting place, really, where farmers can come in, ask their questions. We'll come in and answer them, or other farmers might answer them as well. So it's been a fantastic space for us that we've developed over the last couple of years, and we hope to keep developing. But it's a good way to share information among farmers, because a lot of times it's learning from other farmers is so key to this. So that's what the Hub exists for, and then that on-farm consulting that I've talked about. If you want to check us out, check out www.nextgenagri.com. So that's all I was going to cover today. Hopefully that's been useful for you. I think the industry is a fantastic one. It's in great shape. I really enjoyed the time I did with Uruguay back a couple of years ago, obviously virtually. I think there's a great story there in Uruguay, a great opportunity through a pretty handy wool product, and then a good culture of livestock, the opportunity of further stage processing in Uruguay itself. So there's a whole heap of reasons why it's a pretty interesting industry. What I would say around genetics is be careful of your fat and muscle genetics. Make sure you start to really think about how I'm going to put some condition score on these ewes genetically. I think what we're finding is that they're going to be hard to manage the way that they've been bred recently. While that really focus on heaps of fine wool, it makes them harder to manage. So we do need to think about how we reverse that by putting some fat and muscle into our ewes. But I'm going to pull it up there, and hopefully we're going to take some questions. Hopefully it all works and the technology does what it is meant to do. But yeah, thanks again, and I hope you have a fantastic conference. Cheers.